Hey, what's up? Hello. How's everyone doing? Alex Kapitko here on the Tonic Accord podcast. So my hair is getting crazy. I still need a haircut. I just got back from 4 days camping and it was fun. I know you guys have seen a lot of me lately, but don't worry. I believe by Tuesday, Drew and I are going to be back with another conversation long form episode. Right now, Drew's moving places and they've had some issues getting their Wi-Fi installed. So don't worry. Soon we're going to have our long form episodes coming back. But for today, I just wanted to talk about the fires that are right now ravaging the West Coast. And more specifically, I want to talk about California because I've grown up in California. I'm from California. And, every year for my recent memory, it's gotten worse. And so I kind of want to sit down and just talk about the logistics of these fires. Is it political? Is it only climate change? Is it a mix of both? We're going to get into all of that today, so stick with me and let's enjoy this conversation. So every September, my mom and I usually do a trip after summer to kind of catch up and just wrap up how the summer's been and just have some fun. And this year we decided to go to Northern California to the coast. I would say about 150 miles south of Oregon. And usually we go to get away from people, get away from congestion, get away from contamination, just get away from everything for a couple days and just be isolated, desolate. And this year, we got away from people, we got away from congestion, but we did not get away from pollution, smoke, etc. I believe the sun goes down at about 7:30 right now in Northern California, give or take. And I remember 2 days ago, it was dark at 6:30, because basically the sun was blocked out by smoke and fog on the coast. And the smoke was so thick that even if you did see the sun, it looked like the red light on this camera recorder right there. And it was kind of horrifying. And there was one morning of our trip that we woke up at 10 because it was still dark out going, no, it must be 4 or 5 in the morning. And I looked at my watch and I'm like, oh, shoot, we should have got up an hour ago. But we didn't because literally the sun was still blocked out and it was just this orange haze. And you guys have probably seen this all over social media at this point. But I really hope this is not the new norm. And now currently I'm in Northern California in the town of Truckee. And I just got an alert off of their Facebook page that says that the Forest Service is closing all 18 national forests in California, even for hiking and day use, just because of the fears of the extreme fire danger. And I think this is just where the reality's at right now. And it's not even near me. So this is where I want to kind of get into the meat of the background here, is that according to Politico, in southern Oregon, just about 25 miles north of the California border, there's an insane fire burning right now. Entire blocks of homes were completely demolished by the fire in the towns of Phoenix and Talent. And then in Washington, in the town of Malden, local sheriffs have said that it looks like a moonscape. I mean, just completely empty. Just tragic on such a multitude of levels. And then also in California, you have the North Complex fire. And just to note, when I say complex fire, it basically means that a bunch of small fires over a period of time have kind of culminated into one giant fire. And so you have this North Complex fire that has been raging for weeks through Northern California, and there's 10 people dead already and a large sum of people missing in Butte County. And this is one of the fires that's putting out a lot of smoke into California. And then on the same page, you have in the south, oh gosh, this fire is insane. And now this is a fire that is kind of close to Yosemite National Park in the central Sierras. And I bet people, even who don't know this region, maybe have seen footage of this, but there's footage of people getting airlifted out of a lake. And basically what happened is this fire just came out of nowhere so quickly that people that were camping were told you need to go to the middle of this lake. You need to swim into this lake, and we're going to hell evac you out of there. And that just sums up this impending danger, is that you're not safe anywhere now in California. You can be out camping and there's fires. There can be fires in your town like we've seen in Paradise. Just no one is safe, and it's terrifying. And I saw an article in ABC 7, and that's out of the Bay Area here in California. And it talks about how scientists, in quotes, were categorizing this as an unprecedented territory, and it's a troubling sign of what lies ahead. And there's a guy named Noah Diffenbaugh, and he's a climate scientist and Stanford professor and senior fellow. And he said that, and this is crazy, over 1.8 million acres have burned in the last 30 days. And that's an event that only one of those would happen every 10 to 12 years. So in the last 30 days, we've had 1.8 million acres burned, and something like that is very rare, at least every decade. And the fact that we've seen fires like this keep occurring is insane. So I understand that this is definitely a localized issue in the United States, and you're probably wondering why I'm talking about a very specific issue related to the West. But I do think in some ways there are politics to these fires, and also it's become politicized as we go. And this is mainly because I think that on paper, these are climate issues. All these fires are centered around climate issues that need to be addressed. But then I worry that because of the partisan divide that we're in, dealing with wildfires in general over the decades to come is only going to become a more politicized issue, and we're going to get into a larger quagmire than we're already in. It seems that especially in California, now obviously it depends on the state, but especially in California, Republicans want to blame environmentalists who are hesitant to maybe clear-cut old forest, do prescribed burns, clear timber, etc. They want to point fingers and blame these fires on lackluster environmental policies. But then Democrat politicians seem to be controlled by environmental groups, and there's never an authentic conversation about what needs to be done to deal with climate change, but also help Californian citizens, or insert whatever state we're talking about. And obviously I'm simplifying this to a very dumb scale, but I'm trying to just say that political opportunism on both sides hasn't helped this issue. And so now I want to get into the specifics of where we're at right now. So first, I want to talk about the Trump response to the fires and why I think he is setting a bad precedent. And then I'll go on to the other side, because I do think it takes two sides to tango, especially in this issue. So getting into the criticism of Trump and kind of the right, which is where I'm going to start this discussion, is that, yes, Trump has politicized this, and he did last year about this same time. But I want to add an asterisk to Trump politicizing this, because it's all messaging and it's all image. It's all symbolic. Like, I understand why people are mad at Trump, mainly because over the last month, he's golfed, he's tweeted, he's held news conferences, he's attacked the fake media, he's gone to Milwaukee, and then he went to Louisiana in late August to talk about Hurricane Laura that killed 27 people. And, he talked about how the great people of Louisiana need public support. But where's he been with these fires that arguably have destroyed and created more chaos than this series of hurricanes? He's been silent until Friday when he finally came out and spoke. And I think that's one of the big issues with Trump, is that because he understands that the people he needs to vote for him are not coastal elites, I think he's willing to neglect coastal elites, and he's willing to almost forget about these coastal these coastal states and counties in order to focus his support and his message on places that he needs. And that's a big problem that I have with this administration, is that he's willing to create a narrative that he doesn't care about the West just because it's easier politically for him to do so. And that's the double-faceted part of kind of what Trump is doing. Because he also, on Friday, then wrote, "Thank you to the 28,000 firefighters and other first responders." And he said, "I have approved 37 Stafford Act declarations, including fire management grants to support their brave work." And so, that's where it gets complicated here, is because, Trump is tweeting out criticisms of California, blaming state and local governments for these fires. He doesn't talk about it in press conferences. He focuses on more Rust Belt, southern areas, but he doesn't talk about the fires. But the interesting side effect of this is that I think that Trump does all this for political reasons, because in reality, he actually is delivering on aid. And that's why this gets complicated, is because Gavin Newsom actually talked about how he's thankful for what Trump is doing. He gave further details during a visit to the North Complex fire on Friday, or the area around the North Complex fire, and he said that this Trump administration has actually given him a major disaster declaration last month, and this helped provide businesses and local government support, as well as emergency relief to evacuees and victims. Here's the crazy thing is Trump's been silent nationally since last month about this, but quietly he's been meeting with governors and local officials in order to deliver what is needed. And to me, that's the interesting part here, is that I just think it's all political. Trump is shutting his mouth because he knows his voters don't really like these places, and it's easier politically to blame the local and center governments. And that kind of goes, I guess, to my main takeaway from at least the Republican side of it, is that Trump's just like taking advantage of a very disastrous political climate, but he's actually on the day-to-day still doing what needs to be done. And there are governors that are thanking him, like Gavin Newsom. But the problem is more local, I think, in the fact that here in California, in my district, Tom McClintock is our representative. And I remember earlier this summer, I was on a Q&A with voters, and it was, a question and answer, just you say a concern and you get kind of a, generic response. And I do remember that mainly the narrative that was coming out of McClintock's mouth was mainly environmentalists don't want to cut down any dead trees, they don't want to clear dead brush, and they don't want to do controlled burns. And because of that, California is burning down. Basically, their argument is that the Sierra Club is so concerned about the environment that they've forgotten about average people. And, I think that's the problem with this, is that they're just finger pointing. I think Republicans are right that California's central government hasn't done particularly well over the last century dealing with preparing us for where we're at. But they're taking focus away from the true problem. And that problem is that climate change is exacerbating these issues. California is ill-equipped to deal with this impending problem. And Trump's kind of anti-coastal message, mixing with kind of these local conservatives blaming environmentalists, is just taking away from the fact that we need to do something about this. And so I think this sums up kind of one of the key issues with the Trump administration, is that the messaging is dangerous, but sometimes the day-to-day policies are actually pretty standard for any administration, and I think the case here is the same. It's unfortunate that, Trump's kind of blamed these wildfires on state governments, because it kind of takes away from the point that there's a bigger force at hand, which is climate change, and it also divides the country on something we should be unified on. But then at the same time, I do want to get into the second perspective here, because mismanagement by state governments definitely has a hand in this. And I'm kind of looking at an article here from The Federalist. Now, it's a conservative journal, so, take it with a grain of salt, but take all your news with a grain of salt. And opinions are good or bad, but they need facts. And so this article, How Misguided Environmentalism is to Blame for California's Wildfires, is by Christina Skirk, and it's about a year and a half old. So, understand that. But in this article, she basically talks about how the road to hell is paved on good intentions. So in this article, I think Skirk does a good job of bringing up how mismanagement is a key problem that needs to be addressed, especially in a giant state like California. She says that mismanagement and overregulation deserve most of the blame. But we should keep in mind that the federal government owns 57% of Californian land. And, honestly, she's practically right, because according to a 2017 analytical perspective from the budget of the U.S. government, it says that the federal government owns 45.8% of Californian land, while 4% is owned by the state government. So you put those together, that's about 50%, about half. So half the land is either federally or state controlled. And that does create an overlapping effect of jurisdictions and a convoluted process in dealing with localized problems. And so I think that is a crucial issue, is that, you have CAL FIRE, which manages both state and local land, both federal land and private land. They're doing a lot of stuff at once. And this article goes into another good point, which is that not only timber removal, but also controlled burns are limited. And this article talks about how, prescribed burns keep forests healthy by burning up the underbrush that accumulates on the forest floor. And obviously this can, help a fire start, or it can fuel a fire and make it worse, right? But at the same time, for decades, the Forest Service has suppressed most controlled burns. And now I understand the fears, because a controlled burn, if unattended or mismanaged, could lead to something bigger, and it could destroy property. But at the same time, this is limiting the underbrush. And according to the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, they say that, in quotes, land and fire management have in many cases increased fire hazard. In some shrub types, fire suppression appears to have shifted the first regime away from more smaller fires toward fewer larger fire. And so basically, like the way that I would sum this up is that controlled burns, you can burn away shrubbery, dead trees, and other potential hazards that in a later time could instigate or start a bigger fire. So if you get rid of this small shrubbery at an earlier time, you don't have to worry about maybe the accumulation of all of this down the road. And so there is a correlation that this limit of controlling the forest and cleaning out maybe dead shrubbery could lead to this kind of almost like fueling ticking time bomb that we're seeing. And it is a big problem that we're seeing here is that, for example, in national parks, say like I use the anecdotal example of Yellowstone or Yosemite, where they don't permit controlled burning. They don't clear their forests. They don't clean up timber. They kind of let the forest naturally deal with itself. And yeah, I mean, I understand that. And I think in a national park, that's probably warranted. But between man-made climate change, natural climate change, and just the encroachment of humans into natural environments, there is a reason for controlled burning and for controlled, clearing of old timber and underbrush. And I think we've kind of forgotten that. And a lot of environmental groups, especially in California, are against some of these measures. And so that would be kind of the conservative argument, is that, state governments, especially in California, have allowed this issue to kind of boil over. And the problem is they're missing the bigger point, is that climate change has gotten worse. And unless we find a real life solution, it's only going to get even worse. And so in all here, we have big government failing to pass policy that can actually help prevent fires. And then we have local and state and federal Republicans who just kind of want to point fingers at the left. But then they also want to discredit the climate change movement and the green revolution along the way. So I just worry that Californians have kind of lost our compass that guides our senses. Not every direction is like just due north or due south, right? Like sometimes something is southwest or northeast. And kind of the same goes with these fires. Like maybe these fires are a mix of horrid policies and accelerating climate change. And I just think that mixed with finger pointing from the right and kind of just like stone-headed environmentalism on the left, it's going to be hard to solve these problems in places like California. And because it's become political, there's not a lot of valid alternatives or valid solutions that are being presented. And so my prescription, I would write that we need a federal response that maybe deals with how to look at states and how to have a better response to like growing climate concerns. And we need to enact federal green policies. But then at the same time, we need to understand that localities are different. And especially in places like California, we need to understand that there's a lot of forest and there's a lot of public land that needs to be regulated and checked and maybe like cleaned and burned a little bit. Because if we just keep letting these small fires build up, eventually there's going to be big ones. So I'm just going to leave with that. I just kind of want to try to understand where both sides are on this issue. So take care. You guys have a great day. And like I said, Drew and I are going to be back next week with, our regular schedule. So take care.